Welcome to Cryptic Chronicles, where we delve into the darkest corners of the human mind and bring you tales that will haunt your dreams. Tonight, we begin our journey into the unknown with a story that will make you think twice about offering a ride to a stranger on a dark, stormy night. This is the story of the Hitchhiker, a chilling encounter in the secluded town of Blackwood, where a simple act of kindness turns into a fight for survival against an ancient, malevolent force. Sit back, turn off the lights, and let the suspense take over. Remember, sometimes the real horror is just a heartbeat away. Now, let's dive into the shadows and discover what lurks in the darkness.
Living in the middle of nowhere has its perks. Peace, quiet, and a sense of safety, but that safety can be deceiving. My small town of Blackwood, nestled deep in the forests of Oregon, had always been my sanctuary. Until one night, it became my nightmare. It started on a cold, rainy evening. I was driving home from a late shift at the diner. The roads were empty, as they usually are after midnight. The only sounds were the rhythmic thump of my windshield wipers and the hum of the engine. As I rounded a bend in the road, under the heavy downpour, I spotted a figure on the side of the road. I slowed down and rolled down the window, squinting through the rain. A young woman stood there, drenched and shivering, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she begged, her voice quivering, "can you help me? My car broke down, and I need to get to Blackwood." The desperation in her voice and the sheer vulnerability on her face made me ignore the alarm bells ringing in my head. I hesitated for a moment, then unlocked the passenger door. "Get in. I'll take you into town," I said. She climbed in, and I noticed her hands were icy cold. As we drove, she told me her name was Emily, and she had been visiting her grandparents, who lived in a remote cabin nearby. We drove in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the rain pounding on the roof. I glanced over at her, and something about her story didn't add up. I knew every cabin in these woods, and I didn't remember anyone named Emily or her grandparents. But I pushed the thought aside, convincing myself I was being paranoid. As we approached the turnoff for Blackwood, Emily suddenly grabbed my arm with a grip that nearly made me swerve off the road. "Wait, take the old logging road. It's quicker." "Just ahead. Hurry," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with a desperate urgency that sent a chill down my spine. I knew the logging road she was talking about. It was a narrow, winding path through the densest part of the forest, and it hadn't been used in years. But the desperation in her voice made me turn the wheel and head down the road. The further we drove, the darker and more claustrophobic the forest became. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the rain intensified, turning the road into a muddy mess. My headlights barely pierced the thick fog that had settled over the path. Suddenly, the car sputtered and stalled. I cursed under my breath and tried to restart the engine, but it was dead. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Emily looked at me with a mixture of fear and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "We need to find help," she said. "There's an old cabin nearby. We can take shelter there and call for help in the morning." Reluctantly, I agreed, and we stepped out into the rain. The forest was eerily silent, save for the sound of our footsteps squelching in the mud. Emily led the way, her pace quick and determined. After what felt like hours, we finally saw the outline of a cabin through the trees. It was old and dilapidated, the windows boarded up and the door hanging off its hinges. A chill ran down my spine as we approached. Emily pushed open the door, and we stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, with the faint smell of decay. Emily lit a kerosene lamp, and the flickering light cast eerie shadows on the walls. As I looked around, I noticed strange symbols carved into the wooden beams. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily turned to me, her expression unreadable. "It's a safe place. We can stay here until morning," she said. but something in her voice made me uneasy. I sat down on an old, dusty chair, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. Emily disappeared into another room. Moments later, she returned with a cold, menacing smile. "You should have stayed on the main road," she said, her voice suddenly low and unfamiliar. Panic surged through me. "What do you mean?" Before I could react, her eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, and her form began to shift and ripple. I stumbled back, horrified, as she transformed into a grotesque, inhuman creature, a skinwalker. My mind raced with the fragments of local legends I had heard growing up in Blackwood. Stories of skinwalkers, shapeshifters, who lured people into the woods and used their victims' trust against them, flashed through my mind. Instinctively, I grabbed the kerosene lamp and threw it at the creature. The glass shattered and flames erupted. The skinwalker let out a blood-curdling scream, its monstrous form writhing and distorting in the fire. Seizing the opportunity, I bolted out of the cabin, stumbling through the rain-slicked forest. The trees seemed to close in around me, and the forest floor was a treacherous mess of mud. Behind me, the skinwalker's roars grew louder and more frenzied. Just when I thought I would be lost forever, I saw headlights cutting through the darkness. I ran towards them, screaming for help. A police car pulled over, and 2 officers stepped out, their faces etched with concern. I collapsed at their feet, gasping for breath. "There's a creature, a skinwalker." Back there, I managed to explain between breaths. The officers exchanged worried glances, but helped me into the car. As we drove away, I glanced back and saw the cabin engulfed in flames, the skinwalker's haunting cries echoing through the trees. We reached the safety of Blackwood, and the officers took my statement. They promised to investigate, but deep down, I knew the truth. The skinwalker was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. And I had barely escaped with my life